Welcome back, y'all, for the last instructional video of English 552. This week we are doing Black Panther, A Nation Under Our Feet by Ta-Nehisi Coates and Brian Stelfreeze. I have very much enjoyed this course and sharing these texts with you. We've come all the way from 1986-87, from Mouse, Dark Knight Returns, Watchmen, through the 2000s, 2010s, such great stories as Joe the Barbarian, Persepolis, Displacement, and now we're ending with Black Panther. This is a fitting way to end, in my opinion, because we are only reading the first trade paperback. You can read the next issues if you so desire. Just go on Amazon or preferably to your brick and mortar store. Try to pick those up. And if you want to keep reading this character, see his evolution, see what Coates does with it, I absolutely encourage you to do so. Whenever I teach comics, I like to have one or two ongoing series that I teach just so students have something to leave the class and continue jumping into. So if that's of interest to you, jump in it. Our creators are Ta-Nehisi Coates. He is a Baltimore-born novelist. He's primarily known for his literary novels. He's primarily known as a journalist. He's written for a long time for a magazine called The Atlantic. Black Panther is his first comic, and I think we can see that as we read it. It shows the hallmark of kind of someone learning how to work through the form, but it's got a lot of promise for what's coming for the future. Brian Stelfreeze is the artist. He's American-born painter, penciler, inker. He does pretty much everything on the artistic side of books. He is known primarily as a cover artist, not necessarily as someone who illustrates entire books. My guess here is that Stelfreeze saw the opportunity of working with Ta-Nehisi Coates, someone of such kind of literary recognition, and jumped on the project. It's not unusual for some artists to only do covers or only do interior books. It just depends on the artist and the stage of their career. So the character of Black Panther, please do read the Black Panther Fantastic Four issue at the back of the book. It's Fantastic Four 52, which was published in 1966, written by Stan Lee, art by Jack Kirby. You'll read that and see just what kind of history this character has. The first time he appeared, what Coates is kind of working within and against as a tradition for the character. You'll see lots of progressive and regressive elements of that story, especially if you situate it in 1966. This comic is published a few years before the Black Panther Party emerges as kind of like a formal political movement. It's unclear if there's a relationship between the two. I would imagine there is, but maybe if you know more about that than I do, you could educate me. I'd certainly be welcome that. And on the right-hand side here, you see that Coates had, this is a quote from a 2016 NPR interview that he did. He said, "When I was a kid, Spider-Man was a star. Spider-Man was right under Malcolm X for me in terms of heroes. I would like Black Panther to be some kid's Spider-Man," right? So we see this a lot recently as Marvel and other franchises, other big companies have moved to be more inclusive, right? Acknowledging the power of having a kind of aspirational heroes, people on TV that actually look like and reflect a large and important part of the population, right? So I think Coates saw the opportunity in Black Panther, understood that it might be part of a future movie franchise, and the practical and political and ideological importance of that. And that's something that is one of the reasons why I decided to teach this book. If you aren't familiar with Wakanda, it is a fictional African country that was never taken over by colonists, never subject to the slave trade, and as a result is the most technologically advanced country on the earth. If you're confused about the opening panels, I very much encourage you to go down into the next set of suggested readings and read the annotation of the first issue, which will give you some important background and context and history to help you understand. Because the book just kind of starts in media res. It just kind of starts in the middle of things, and it had recently been flooded by Namor, the Submariner, who's not Aquaman, by the way. This Fantastic Four comic at the back is fairly typical for 60s comics. It's largely an adventure story, requires a lot of diegesis, right? It relies on that. There's no way that Thing could say so many words in each panel as he does, for example. As I said, it's as progressive as regressive, but as Coates notes in a 2016 interview, this is on your right-hand side, I don't think people should lose sight of what it meant to create an African, a black superhero in the 1960s. It happens within this of the civil rights movement, but I think if you search pop culture at any point, particular time for someone like the Black Panther, he would come up really short. If you compare it to the other areas of pop culture, Marvel was pretty much ahead. So, like I said, it's got its issues, but as Coates reminds us, if you situate it historically, that it does some more work than maybe we'd like to admit nowadays. So, A Nation Under Our Feet, a quick summary. So, T'Challa is the Black Panther, the king of Wakanda. Wakanda has been plagued by floods and political strife while the Black Panther was working with the Avengers. His sister Shuri has died. Maybe died, maybe not. She's on the plane of Wakandan memory. We'll see if she comes back if you decide to read later issues. Tetu, along with Zenzi, have fomented revolution among the Wakandans, such as the mine at the book's opening, where we see that political strife. Sorry about my email. Tetu is being funded by Zeke Stain, an American's weapon manufacturer and dealer. And unless I'm mistaken, Zeke Stain is the only white character in the book. And he's, of course, a bad guy. So I think that it's important and useful to think through the political kind of connotations of who is allowed to be a hero. So often, historically in comics, the bad guys, the antagonists are racial minorities. And here we get that flipped, and I think purposefully and smartly by Coates. There's a secondary plot involving Ayo and Aneka, who are Dora Milaje, sorry if I said that wrong, who fight against the warlord Mandla, the man-ape, right? So the narrative here is kind of disjointed. It's hard to follow at times. I've read this a few times, and it's still kind of, it quickly will move between time and space, page to page. So I really recommend that annotation if you're having trouble keeping up. The opening image to me is really interesting, and I think we're thinking about a king on his knees. So the opening image we get is Black Panther not victorious, but rather suffering. He's got an injury on his head. He is in a kind of vulnerable position here, showing that he's hurt. And this Jacob Brogan, who wrote a piece on Vulture, I believe, about this, said, "It's a strange, abrupt way to begin a heroic epic. Our hero on all fours, his head bloodied, and yet it's also not entirely exceptional within the history of superhero comics. We delight in lowering heroes to our level, if only so that we might ascend with them when they inevitably rise again." So it starts out at a low area when really all the Black Panther can do is kind of come up, is rise up, is mature, change, grow. And we do see that throughout the course of the comic, particularly through his interactions with his mother, Ramonda. We skip the idea that there are many different perspectives, right? And I think that's one of the novel's real ambitions, is to show the problems with kingship, the problems with absolute rule and monarchy within a kind of enlightened, futuristic society. And one of the ways the novel does that is through the tree poem in chapter 3, right? So we see two versions of that. First, from Tetu's point of view, and he's kind of the antagonist here. And then we see it through the people's points of view. So when it starts, "Once when I was tree, African sun woke me up green at dawn. African wind combed the branches of my hair. African rain washed my limbs," etc. And then by the end of that poem, what Tetu says is, "Flesh does not know what he does, does not give me life, nor can he take it away. That is what the spirits are singing now. It is time that flesh bow down on his knee again." So that's one view of what this poem might mean. And then if we go towards the end of the chapter, in the very last page of the chapter, we get a different version of that, right? The two African people that are bowing down in front of Tetu earlier are now retelling the tree poem from a different point of view, saying, "Once when I was tree, my ancestors slept in my outstretched arms. African soil nourished my spirit. African wind combed the branches of my hair. Once when I was tree, African rain washed my limbs. African sun woke me up green at dawn." So different gestures behind these characters, different understandings of what history might teach us, different understandings of what to do with tradition and how to situate oneself within it. We can also see this as a kind of commentary on the competing demands of kingship, right? One is like, what's the role of technology in a culture? What's what do we owe to the natural world? How do we be good stewards of that natural world? And alternative models of like heroism is something I think that the novel's really interested in. Rather non-Western ideas of heroism, let's beat everything up and beat everything into submission ideas of heroism. And that thing I think is reflected through characters like Changamire. And that word, his name comes from a historical Central African dynasty with that figure was the first ruler. So there's kind of a historical basis to this character. Ramonda and Changamire are important influences on Black Panther, right? And I think we see Black Panther's internal conflict either reflects or creates Wakanda's political strife, right? And one thing I think is really important in book 4, we get T'Challa's conversation with Ramonda, his mother, which is where he realizes that he has to change and grow and become more of a philosopher, become more in tune with what he owes his people as king. If he wants to be king, he has to model being king. He has to be a citizen first, right? He has to be someone who does not use his subjects. He does not use the natural world in ways that benefit himself, but rather subordinates himself to the kind of demands of being king. And I think it's important, that it's his mother, right, that prompts him on this quest. So a woman. So one of the things I think the novel does is to try to kind of decenter power away from the hero, away from Black Panther in some ways, and to disperse that power throughout this society. Black Panther's not the kind of vigilante that Batman is, or the sun god that Superman is. He's his own kind of character, and I think we see Coates trying to pull out some of the familial influences, some of the ways in which, the Changamire is asking his students to read John Locke, who's a well-known Western philosopher, the ways that Wakanda or an alternate model of kingship might, be interested in Western ideals, but also in ones that aren't Western too, right? So I think those are all things that the novel's interested in. Finally, we'll just spend a few minutes talking about the questions. So the first question I ask is about the history of the character. How does Coates' story rework or reimagine Lee and Kirby's first issue of Black Panther, right? It would be really easy here just to say that Jack Kirby and Stan Lee's first version is problematic or something like that. It's absolutely not what I'm asking here. I'm asking in what ways specifically does Coates try to rework aspects of that story or reclaim aspects of that story. The second one about art. What's the artistic style contribute to the novel, right? So we might think about how does it develop from that first issue, right? Or other superhero books we've read, whether it's Watchmen or Dark Knight Returns or even Long Halloween. What is is there cinematicness to it, right? Like, so just think about the art and how it contributes to the novel. T'Challa is a troubled protagonist. The comic has the requisite violence, but it doesn't seem to be really interested in violence, right? How would you compare Black Panther to other superheroes that we've considered? And here you could also talk about superheroes from movies, I guess, but I'd prefer you talk about from the comics. But if you want to go movies, that's fine too. Close reading, look at a particular page, offer a detailed close reading of it and how it contributes. Kayla Sweeney did a good job of this last week, so you might look at her post if this is something that's interesting to you. And then the tree poem, right? Like, I give you some ways you might think about that, but I think that's a really important part of the ongoing narrative that is this Black Panther story. So maybe you could do a close reading of that and say how it figures into your reading of the book as a whole. And then one thing Coates says is that an idea he was trying to explore through this issue or this trade paperback was, can a good man be a king, and would an advanced society tolerate a monarch? How do you think the novel deals with this question, right? Where does it come down? How does it comment on that particular question? All right, y'all, I just want to say again how much of a pleasure it's been to get to know you this term, to deal with your ideas, and to help hopefully you grow as a writer and thinker, and to introduce you to some great books of graphic narrative. And I think if you have questions in the future, or you want to talk more about comics or anything like that, don't hesitate to reach out. I'd love to hear from you. All right, y'all. Have a good day.